Welcome to this Lit in Colour event brought to you by Pearson EdXL and Penguin Random House. My name is Pam McLaughlin and I work for EdXL as part of the English qualifications team. And for those of you who may not know, Lit in Colour was created in 2020 by Penguin Books UK and equality think tank, the Runnymede Trust. Lit in Colour is all about supporting schools to make the teaching of English more inclusive of writers of colour. The Lit in Colour Pioneers pilot is supporting schools who've changed their GCSE and or their A-level text to study examination texts by writers of colour through the Pearson EdXL's literature specifications. I'm pleased to say that today, as part of our CPD, for our Lit in Colour Pioneer schools, we present to you this event for A-level study on the text Sweat by Lynn Nottage. Your host for this event is Dr. Andrew Green, who was previously an English teacher and now Senior Education Lecturer at Brunel University. He will be speaking with our special guest, Linette Linton, and so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andrew, who will be your host for this event. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Pam, and welcome to all of you joining us to see this event today to talk about Lynn Nottage's excellent play, Sweat. I have to say this was a new play to me, and I have thoroughly enjoyed reading it, an excellent piece of work, and I very much look forward to speaking it through with our special guest for this event, who is Lynette Linton. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, Lynette. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for asking me.
By way of a brief introduction, it's probably good for me to tell you a little bit about Lynette. She's a BAFTA-nominated writer and director who's worked for theatre, TV and film, and is the artistic director of the Bush Theatre. And I know she's going to tell us a little bit about what the role of artistic director involves, for those of us like me, perhaps, who didn't know quite so well before we started doing this. She was associate director at the Gate Theatre between 2016 and 17, and the resident assistant director at the Donmar Warehouse until 2018. She won Best Director at the Evening Standards Awards in 2022 and was nominated for a BAFTA in 2023 in the Emerging Talent Fiction category for her work as a director on My Name is Leon. She's currently developing screen projects with Avalon Entertainment, Home Team Content and Witchwood Media. She's also co-founder of a production company, Black Apron Entertainment. She was the director of Lynn Nottage's Pulitzer Prize winning play Sweat, which is what we're here to talk about this afternoon, at the Donmar Warehouse, and is currently working on a production of the sequel to Sweat, which is called Clydes. So I don't think I've missed anything there. I hope not, Lynette. And thank you very much indeed for joining us. As I said at the beginning, I think it would be really helpful for the people who are joining us to know a little bit about what your role is and what, first of all, being an artistic director is within the context of the theatre and how that differs from your work when you're directing a particular production.
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for asking me to join you today. Okay, cool. So I'm artistic director of the Bush Theatre, which is a new writing venue in Shepherd's Bush. Please check us out if you haven't. We only do new plays, so we don't do any classics such as Shakespeare or anything that's been done before. We normally do premieres and new writing. We particularly focus on British and Irish playwrights and work very closely to develop talent. Being an artistic director basically means that I'm artistic director, CEO, and on the board. And it basically means that I, along with an executive director and my wonderful team here, run the company. So that's both sides. So it's the business side, setting the budgets, HR, running the bar, and all the sort of practical elements of running a business. But also artistically, that is what I'm in charge of. So I program the shows, I work with writers, we choose together what the shows are that are going to go onto the stage. I work with our community department, who do lots of work with schools and young people. We run a young company here as well. So I'm artistically in charge of the work that is going on the stage here. So I read a lot of plays, talk to lots of writers, work with lots of directors, work very closely with people's voices you can hear in the space, because I'm in my office right now, so apologies for the noise in here. It will be a bit noisy because we're working theatre. So that's kind of my job. It's a big job. It's one day I can be talking about toilets. One day I can be talking about decorating what the halls are going to be like, and then other days I'm in a reading of a script that we might decide to put on. It's a really rewarding job. It's super exciting, and I absolutely love it. And please do come and see us, because our kind of mission here is to kind of like really disrupt the canon. And when I talk about the canon, I talk about traditional sort of theatre texts and plays that we study at school and at college. We're here to kind of change the game in terms of what theatre is, which is a nice segue into Sweat, actually, because I think Sweat does that really well. To answer your question, Andrew, so that's my full-time job as an artist director.
Thank you.
But I'm also a freelance director, which is when I'm hired by different theatres to direct their plays, which is how I got Sweat.
Thank you. And so one thing that would be really interesting, because obviously the students who are preparing for this specification are English literature students. And so I think that something that would be really interesting for them to know is how you work with a play when you first come to it. Because of course, when you first come to a play, you come to it as a reader. You're presented with a script, and you have to think about how you're going to convert that script into what the audiences will actually experience, and what the actors will do, and what the different people involved in the production of the play will do. I wonder if you could talk us through a little bit about what happens, you know, for you, how you do it, and perhaps how the theatre you work in does it, in terms of converting a play from the page onto what we'll see on the stage.
That's a very big question. So in terms of like a theatre doing it, we're always looking for that sort of, I kind of call it a magic, like a feeling of magic, and being able to see it on stage in terms of like what the story is, but why we need to tell it, why it needs to be told now, and then also kind of like what do we see for it, and then we would partner it with the director, and then they would take the vision of what that is and work with the writer to put it on stage. As a director, if I'm given a script to read it, it's always about, I always try and get through that by looking at which character I connect with. So I'm looking for a person in a play that I go, oh, I know who that is, and I relate to that, and it's taught me something about me. And so that's how I get into it. As if I read something, I have to connect with a character or something, or an event that happens in the play, and then I know that I might be able to direct it. But from the perspective of the Bush, we're here to represent contemporary Britain. So it's always a little bit like, okay, what's this play? Why do we need to tell this story? Why will this resonate with audiences? I'm a big fan of James Baldwin, and I always really feel like he's got a quote about like seeing your, like the place in which it exists will be when you make it yourself. And I think that's what plays do. That's what good writing does. That's what good storytelling does, is when you can watch something or read something and see yourself in it, whether that's on a universal level or whether that's individually on a character, if that makes sense. Long-winded answer. Does that make sense?
No, that's great. I think that's really interesting, because of course one of the things that students of literature are asked to do is to think about the contexts for their study, and those contexts of reception, you know, who they are and where they are really important ones. And I think that you've raised a really interesting point there, that how important it is to think about what has made us the readers we are, or what has made us the audience that we are, that will you know, help us to think about what we're being presented with, whether that's through a novel, a play, or a poem, whatever it might be. So thank you. That's really helpful to think about those contexts, and interesting to hear about you and your work and how you do that. And I know we're going to be,
I think because I'm sorry, it's so hard on Zoom, isn't it? You interrupt people. But I was just going to say, because James Baldwin talks a lot about like the first time he realized he wasn't alone was when he started to read. And I think that is, for me, the fundamental kind of like why storytelling, why English literature, why plays, why theatre is so important, is because it is, as humans, how we negotiate why we're in the world, and that we aren't the first people to experience what we're going through. And actually knowing that that's happened before, or that you can relate to something, is humanity. So big ideas, but really important, and also like really make me really passionate about what we do when we tell stories.
Yeah, that's good. And a very, very different end of the spectrum. But Philip Larkin, interestingly, says something quite similar about how you know, the importance of the moment of reading, and how he says that the text doesn't really exist until the moment that somebody sits down and reads it, because up to that point it's just something on a shelf, and at the point someone sits down to read it, it becomes a real world again that people can live in and work with. So thank you. That's really interesting. And we're going to be talking about quite a few of those things, hopefully, as we go through the next hour together. But one of the contexts that I particularly wanted to pick up on to begin with is the fact that this is obviously an American play by an American author, written about an American situation. And I thought as a nice way in, we could read what is printed as a poem at the introduction to the play in the edition of it that I have, which is the Nick Hearn Books version. I'm going to read that. It's a short poem by Langston Hughes. Oh yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me. And yet I swear this oath, America will be. Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we the people must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains and the endless plain, all stretch out of these great green states and make America again. Now, as we said at we were beginning, a great poem that, I think, and a nice starting point for us, because one of the things that's so interesting about this play is the particular kind of political and social situations out of which it's written. You know, particularly with the kind of the real resonance between the final line of that poem for me, where Hughes says, "And make America again," with that slogan of Donald Trump going into the election, "Make America great again," which kind of in many ways, you know, relates to the situations that I think we see in this play. I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about those particular contexts, political and social, and also whether or not that kind of raised any issues for you when you were thinking about doing the play for an English audience.
Hi. I no, in terms of answer the last question first, because I think, as I sort of said originally, is that storytelling is universal, and we also in this country have a lot of American media and a lot of American influence. So I don't think that an American story is something that we're not going to be able to relate to. I also think it's about how you get into it on a human level is always how I think about my work. So it's about those characters and it's about what they're going through. And as humans, no matter who you are, like sometimes you can relate to a thing that someone is going through. So I always approach that. I approach the characters, I approach the story and what they're going through in their day-to-day lives without thinking about the politics. Because actually, when you're making a play, it's about the story. And then what's so wonderful about Sweat is that because of what those characters go through, we're able to explore the politics. And obviously with what was going on in our country with Brexit and all of the stuff that's been happening, there's parallels politically, I think, with what Lynn was trying to talk about as like with what's going on here too. So it may not be exactly the same experience, but we're also able to relate to some of what she's saying. But I don't think as an artist that you ever go into, particularly if you're making or interpreting someone's words, you go in straight away and go politics. You go in and you go human first, characters first, story first, politics on top of that. And when I talk about playwriting with writers, that's what we talk about. It's about the story, it's about the people, and then through that you explore the themes. Does that make sense? I hope it does.
It does. It does. Yes, thank you very much. So how did you set about working on this play then? Were there any kind of aspects of the play that you found particularly challenging as you were thinking about it as a director and as a cast?
Yeah, I think it is a very challenging play. I think characters say things and turn into things that are very hard to watch. I think one of the things that is so wonderful about Lynn's work is that she takes you on a journey, that you get to know who these people are and you understand and you see what happens to them. But of course, you've got a character like Jason who at the top of the show and at the end of the show has incredibly offensive and racist tattoos on his face. And you go, so why would I care about that man? He's a racist. And I think that what Lynn does so wonderfully is like take you on the journey of understanding why people, what happened to him, what happened to Chris, what happened to Cynthia, what happened to Tracy individually, but also collectively. But it was hard. Like when I first started reading it, I was like, yo, who's this guy? Like, how am I gonna be able to work with an actor to like put him on stage? But that's also part of the process of directing is working with an incredible actor, which we can talk about the actors as well who were in my production of the show, to try and talking to Lynn about why she wrote this character and how he became that person that we meet at the top of the show. And I think it's so interesting that she chooses that we meet him at the top of the show. Like he's the first, apart from Evan, he's the first character we meet. And is also the only character that continues into Clyde's, which is her sequel as well. So, you know, those choices are really interesting to interrogate as a director.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? Because we kind of meet that character at their most unsympathetic, don't we?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the kind of, you know, the racist language, the obnoxious attitude, and then we're invited to go back into the story. I wonder if you've got anything to say about that, and why that was particularly perhaps interesting to you.
I think it's Lynn's writing and the character, again, like how from a human perspective am I going to be able to explore and unpack this person that I really don't like at the top of the show and really don't like for a lot of the show. And that's really interesting, working with an actor. Patrick Gibson played the part in the show that we did at the Donmar, and he also plays Jason in Clyde's, which is on right now till December 2nd, if anybody wants to see it. It's a kind of loose sequel to Sweat. And Paddy did a lot of work to try and unpack that and understand who that character was, which was a challenge because he's not very nice. But I think what Lynn was trying to do there, and hopefully has done successfully, is take you on the journey of how he ended up there. So yeah.
Maybe that would be a good point to talk about those kind of. You're obviously a very interesting character as a starting point, and because this is a kind of new play, it's new to the specification, and I suspect that Lynn's work is going to be new to many teachers and students. We've got quite a few images here, which have been kindly, you know, we've been permission of the Donmar to show these. I wonder if perhaps you could just talk us through a few of these characters, who they are,
Yeah,
and your thoughts about them. That would be just really interesting.
Yeah, of course.
Into.
So I'll put that. It's so interesting that I always find it fascinating because Lynn is, in my opinion, one of the greatest living playwrights on the planet right now, and she is the only woman to win the Pulitzer Prize twice. So I'm so glad that her work is getting a bigger kind of audience, because it's well overdue, to be honest. So it's really great that so many people are going to be studying her. She's got some incredible plays. Our production was on at the Donmar in 2018, and then it went to the West End in 2019. This here is the wonderful Claire Perkins and Martha Plimpton, who are incredible actors. Martha played Tracy, she's on the right, and Claire played Cynthia.
Who I most know, the actress on the right, I most know from The Good Wife.
Yes, she won an Emmy for that, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
She is
a very different part here.
Very different part. She was fantastic. Both of them were fantastic in this show. This is a still from the second scene of the play, when we are in the pub and they are talking about not the pub. Oh my days, it's so British. The bar. When we are in the bar, and we getting to know them for the first time. So that's who played them in my production.
Thank you.
This is Claire again, obviously plays Cynthia, and this is an actor called Will Johnson who played Brucey, her husband. This is in scene, I maybe get the numbers wrong, I think it's scene 4, when he comes in and I introduced to him for the first time, and he's trying to talk to her and she's like not having any of it.
Yeah, so where he's kind of coming back into her life a bit, meeting up with Lauren. Yeah. Well, again, a wonderful actor. That's Claire again, in that same scene, in her clothes, in her sort of work clothes that she'd wear at the factory. Thank you. That's Leanne Best, who played Jessie, and this is the scene, her birthday scene, where she gives that beautiful speech about her life and what she might have done if she'd made different decisions. Again, absolutely on her 43rd birthday. I was like, how old was she? It's right there. So she, so Lee was an incredible actress to work with as well. Yeah, so there's that kind of lovely bit, isn't there? There's that repeated list of the cities that she might have gone traveling through, and how that's kind of obviously existed as a kind of, you know, soundtrack in her mind of an alternative life that never quite happened. There's something very poignant about that, isn't there? And also Lee's performance of that was just beautiful. It made people cry, because it is that sort of, particularly when she repeats them for the second time, that sort of wistful wishing and kind of to herself. Very, very poignant, very beautiful performance. So there we have the three ladies at the bar again.
The three women at the bar. That picture's become kind of like the picture of Sweat. You can see, and I don't know if we've got any pictures of our full set here, but I worked with an incredible designer called Frankie Bradshaw, which is also part of the process of directing, is that you collaborate with different designers. So you'll have a set and costume designer, a sound designer and composer, sometimes the same person, sometimes two people, and a lighting designer. And you all work together to kind of make the world come alive. And what we did with Sweat was that we had the bar set in a kind of feeling of an old factory that had been like broken down, basically. So when you come in, you feel like you're in this weird kind of hollow factory space. And as we move from 2008 to 2000, it turns into the bar. Wow. I wish I could show you that, but it was 5 years ago. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. We'll come back to that question about the time, because that's a really interesting element of it, isn't it? And how those are handled. Sorry, you just raised the music. One of the things that's interesting is, of course, there's a couple of points at which, you know, there's kind of music written in, as it were, isn't there? There's I think it's a Stevie Wonder song, isn't it, that one of the characters starts singing to his mother, "Happy Birthday to you," and then we've got the Cher song that the women, you know, start to sing together. What other role did music play in the production, and you know, how was that dealt with?
Music plays a massive role in all of my shows, because I think it is such a visceral thing, particularly in the theatre, because it's such an element of how you create the magic, because it's happening in front of you and characters are reacting to it live. So we had Lynn had actually, while she was writing it, she had a sort of Spotify playlist of songs that she listened to while she wrote Sweat, but also that she wanted in the production. So we spent a lot of time there's a jukebox in the bar. So we spent a lot of time, me and my sound designer, George Dennis, going through specifically what would be on the jukebox. So every song had a hidden meaning and was playing in the background and meant something. So it was really massively part of the identity of the show. And then we also had composition, original music that was inspired by some of the songs that Lynn gave us, that kind of took us through scene by scene. It's a massive part of the show.
That was that, sorry, just out of interest, was that part of the way in which you kind of handled the time slips?
Let me tell you how we did that.
Yeah,
kind of. So basically, I think there's any images of it, but we had the space. It was like, as I said, a warehouse, and everything that you see here, so the bar was covered with dust sheets, so it just looked like a really broken down space. We had Evan and Jason, who start the play, lights up, and they were sitting in this space that could be a really old kind of, you know, interrogation room. You're not sure what it is. While he's talking about Chris, and I want to talk a lot about Chris because he's a very important part of the story for me. He's talking about Chris. Chris appears as if you can see him, as if he manifests him. And Chris comes in, circles Jason. And as he circles Jason, Jason leaves, and then Chris replaces the scene. When he has that monologue about, you know, I saw Jason across the road, and it made me think of home, whatever the line is. I should know, but it was 5 years ago. We start to hear the sound of factories. We start to hear the sound of Reading, Pennsylvania. And so Chris, for me, was the way out into the time jumps and into the story, because he takes us back. So while he's talking to Evan, he invokes the feeling of the time he's talking about, and chooses to take the dust sheet off, and in doing so reveals the bar, and then everything around him turns into 2000. So all of the characters pull the tables on and sort of create the bar around him, while he's having a moment on stage, remembering and invoking the memory. That's how we did it.
Yeah.
I was very proud of it, but it was very movement heavy, kind of quite visual, like a feeling that he was taking control and taking us back into his story, so you could understand why he ended up where he ended up.
Right, and then how was that reversed at the point when it goes back to the 2008 setting?
The other way around. So that happens in Act 2. It happens again, where he talks to his mum and then takes us back into 2000 again. So he leads that again, and it's similar. So he's like taking us back into the memory. And then at the end of the play, when it goes back into 2008, what we did was we had, after the fight, we had president, we had Bush talking, so the president talking, doing a kind of speech to the nation, and you see characters watch it, and then it turns into 2008 around them while they're watching the speech of the president, if that makes sense. So there was always something that took us into the memory and took us out of the memory and sort of spun the stage physically, as in the characters move physically to take us in and out of that. But really mostly it was always normally led by Chris, because he was the character, and I think you're going to ask me the question, so I'm preempting it, but Chris was the character for me that I related to the most. So we can talk about him in a minute. This is Martha.
Move on to.
This is really good for you to see what I was talking about in terms of how we place the bar inside the warehouse, inside the factory. So you can see you can see at the top the pipes and the sort of like scaffolding.
Factory window.
Yeah, and so and the bar being in the factory.
Yes, so the kind of those kind of two aspects of the characters' lives coming together into that one space.
Yeah. The next picture, which we just saw, is Chris. So Chris is the character I'm talking about, and that he was played by Ozzy Akili, who is an incredible actor, and Claire again, who played his mum. And this is an example again of how. So we're in 2008 here, and he's at his mum's house, and then when he starts talking about that day and invokes the memory, Jason comes on and transforms the scene, and then the sort of argument happens around him. So it's always him for me that takes us in and out of those spaces, kind of like his memory.
This is really helpful, because this is what really kind of the students and the teachers who are lucky enough to be watching this will realize that that kind of way in which they can really begin to think about the idea of stagecraft and how that actually relates to the words on the page and how those things have been done. So thank you, that's really helpful. Do go on, tell us more about Chris. He was obviously a real big factor for you in this.
So that's just to say that's Patrick, I call him Paddy Gibson, who played Jason, and again is in Clyde's. Chris for me, I remember reading it and feeling really moved by his story. His relationship with his mother I loved. His relationship with his father I thought was really interesting and something I'd want to explore on stage. And also how he sort of gets pulled into this, and how that fight scene in the end when they attack Oscar, in our version, that's not what he went into the space for. He just finds himself in a space where he's trying to calm his best mate down, and then suddenly he's in a fight. And actually, some of those choices, me and Ozzy spoke about quite a lot, about how he ended up in a space and how that can happen to people without them even realizing. But I really connected with him. And as I said, like, normally if I find a character that I go, yo, it's you, then I can explore him, and then it moves into the space of everybody else, and he was that character for me. And I was really privileged to work with such an incredible actor who was able to kind of bring him alive in the way that I saw him in my head. And it also really helped me understand the character of Jason as well, because Chris is Jason's best friend, so that relationship and that helped me unlock who Jason was as well, if that makes sense.
It does. One of the things that's really, I mean, Chris, of course, that has all those kind of aspirations in terms of becoming a teacher. He gets the place to go off and train to become a teacher. In that, of course, that's a big theme, isn't it, running across kind of all of the characters, really, that idea of aspiration and stolen aspirations. Whether it's because of a changing ethnic makeup within the community and all of the unpleasantness that leads to, or whether it's to do with changing labor relations or whatever it might be. What about that kind of theme and that idea of kind of stolen or broken aspirations?
That's another reason why I've connected with him, because I think that is also kind of this feeling of, how do I get out of this? How do I break free from this space? And again, quoting James Baldwin, like creating my own space so I can succeed. And I think that's not a direct quote from James Baldwin. I've just taken his quote and made it something else. But I think absolutely. And you see it, and as you mentioned, you see that with Jessie as well. like I was going to leave and I didn't, and what that means and what this space means, so that when everything starts to break down, how much it means to people. That's also what I mean about, like, with Chris, him being very clear with what he wants and then getting pulled into a space that he didn't want to be in. I found that was such an interesting journey to explore theatrically. Yeah, so I think it's but I suppose that's also my point about what I mean when we talk about character and story over politics, you know, because within aspirations and within that conversation of I stayed in this town my whole life, and this is who I am and this is what I understand, and I never moved, I never left, or I never did anything else. You can explore politics within that, and you can understand, and you can explore where that character is coming from without going, let's have a lecture on the politics of America in 2008. And I think that's the way you get into these characters, is that of course the politics are important, and Lynn puts that at the top of the play. So it's important. Sorry, she puts that in every scene, doesn't she? And what we decided to do was actually the TV in the bar, we had news articles playing what was happening.
So that's the kind of newsreel bits you're talking about. Yeah,
so we had projection in the West End where, like, so what she talks about, you know, the different sorts of facts that she gives, that's happening in the background on the telly, but like they're not noticing what's happening because they're wrapped up in their own lives. So even though the politics are happening behind them, they're talking about their factory. It's all related, but as humans, we think about ourselves, right? So that's the kind of what I mean about, like, all that context is important because it's up here. But if you're living that moment, that right now, you don't know it's up here because you're living it. So that's how you get into it from a stagecraft and a human and a drama perspective of going, you know, Chris is going, I want to be a teacher, I want to get out, I want to do this, not paying attention to what's happening up here. So it's slightly different, obviously, when you're studying a text from an English perspective, like an English literature perspective. You know, you include all the context, but I think if anyone does go on to do this as a piece of drama and explore the stagecraft of it, that's a really interesting way of how you don't accidentally create characters who are really heavy and are walking around with the weight of the world on their shoulders, because that's not who these people are. That's us projecting the politics on it.
Yeah, and in fact, an important part of the study that they have to do, that they have to work towards in exam speak, it's AO2, which is about the ways in which meanings are shaped. And so the stuff that you're talking about here is right on the money in terms of the kinds of things that students, you know, can really profitably think about. You know, in terms of the way that they're thinking about the way that, in this case, you know, Lynn has been able to shape our responses to these characters and their situations. One that I'm interested in talking about as perhaps a foil to Chris and his situation is Cynthia, because she, of course, does aspire, she gets her aspirations, she gets her promotion at work, which leads to all kinds of unforeseen consequences. I wonder if there's anything interesting that you could say about the kind of dramatic interplay between those two characters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's Lynn's incredible writing and how she sets up a character that you hopefully really love, Cynthia, and you see why she's doing it and you understand why she goes for that job, and it's amazing that she gets it, and then the fallout from that, without explicitly going, this is the reason, this is the reason, this is the reason, this is the reason. It's all very much up for interpretation in how you play those parts, and also what she's saying. The relationship with, again, the reason why Chris was my way in, how his relationship with his mum, I'm going to use the word deteriorates, but also, like, you don't really see in the second half of the play, you don't really see him with her that often, whereas in the first half there felt like there was a bit more of a relationship, and how that changes was another reason why I was so interested in directing it and wanted to do it justice. But yeah, I think that's Lynn's, she's so amazing at making these parallels without you even realizing it, and you watch the whole show and you go, oh whoa, I didn't even realize that was going to happen. But yeah, I think it's astonishing writing. That's why I say she's one of the best playwrights living right now. She really is. You should read everything.
I certainly will go on and read some more after this. That was right. Maybe we could just look through a few more of these kind of images and see what there is there that you might want to point out to us. So another bar scene there. That's Stan at the back, isn't it?
That's Stan at the back, yeah. And the one before was Oscar. I don't know if people saw that, but yeah, that's Stan.
All right. Yes, there we have Oscar.
Was at the bar. Oscar, yeah, Oscar, there is Oscar. That was a really good transition. I just wanted to comment on what you said, Andrew, about stagecraft, because I think the thing to maybe think about is, you know, it's never just lights down and scene up, lights down, scene up, lights up, in terms of how we make a play on stage. And I think that what Lynn gives us so much is the space between the scenes, particularly with the context of what's happening in the world. This is an example of a transition that was not scripted and was something that we put in, which explored a little bit the tensions of Oscar in the space when other people were in the space. So just there's sort of, obviously you can't really see it because it's live, but you know, the character of Tracy just giving him a really dirty look in the middle of, like, while she crosses over, and him catching it and it just kind of freezing him. And so the sort of bits of story that you can tell through transitions is another thing to think about in
you make a really nice point there, because then, you know, of course, when you're looking at it in a text, it's just a white space, isn't it, between the white space of the page between the end of one scene and the next. You know, sometimes it's literally a blank page, isn't it? But that the way that those things can't exist within the, you know, within a production, that something has to be happening there, and how that's kind of, in a sense, invisible to literature students, and makes how, shows how important it is to try to see a recording or a streaming, if you can't actually go to a live event, to get a sense of the way that those things happen.
Yeah, I think it's important to, like, think about the difference when you're studying a piece of prose and when you're studying a play, because a play is, you know, I studied, shout out all the English literature students, because I studied English literature and language at university, and I love it. I think it's, you know, if I was going to study again, I'd go back and do more. But I think the thing that I would now, particularly as a theatre director, is shout about is that they are different. They are different mediums. So a play is meant to be performed, and so it's really important that the stuff that happens in between the scenes, but also like how it's performed and how it's directed, really it influences what you see, because you see it and you hear it and you live it with those characters. Whereas a novel you read and it's in your head. And so I do implore people, when they're thinking about it, like, the space between the scenes is as important as the scenes, because you have to tell the story throughout. That's probably more for drama students as well, but I think it's really important to just keep that in your head when you're reading a play, that the director's job is also to keep it alive.
Yeah, no, most certainly, very, very important to try to get a sense of that. Was there an actual stream recording done of the of Sweat?
An archive is what they call it. So there is one floating around, but it's not a professional recording. I'm sorry, sad about that.
Oh, that's all right. No, it just would have been great to direct, you know, people into where they could find it, so that they get a sense of these kinds of things that you're talking about.
What I would say, which we're lucky, is that Clyde's is on right now, and it's the sequel to this show, and Jason's in the show. So you can feel, I think, if you're studying Lynn's work, you can feel her in Clyde's. And like, a lot of people that watch Sweat and watch Clyde's are like, they feel part of the world. So if people are interested, come and see Clyde's, because you can get a feel of what I'm talking about.
In the final slide, I've got an image that shows that, so then people will remember it and they can book it, whatever. So yeah.
And you might see me, I'm there all the time. Yeah, please move on.
Again?
So, yeah, so then we've got so there we've got Stan, of course.
Stan.
Oh, and this is Chris, and is this the scene at the very beginning of the play?
That was the scene. This is Chris and Evan right at the beginning, so you can see we put the chairs in the middle of the space, and you can just about make out the sort of dust sheet behind them. So you didn't know where you were at the top of the show, and that's Ozzy delivering the monologue that takes us into our kind of, the world is transforming into the past. I think that is one of my, you're going to ask me the question, but I think that was one of my favorite moments, not necessarily themes, but moments in the show, is that sort of transitions.
Well, let's move on to that then, and then we can perhaps come back to some of these other images later if we've got time. But so about that question of, you know, what your own personal kind of favorite moments were in the play, and then, you know, as well, perhaps what were the most challenging for you to work with, and why would that be?
Favorite's a hard question because I think it's such a beautiful play. I love different things about every scene. I loved R, I should say, because it's a whole design effort, taking us in and out of time and how we did that. I really love the scene where you see the female friendship in scene 2, where you see those 3 women supporting and loving each other and how tight they were. I think it's really lovely to see that on stage. I really love Jessie's speech where she talks about what we spoke about already. I think it's really beautiful. And genuinely, Chris and Jason, I think any scene that they're in together was just magnetic, because again, showing a friendship between 2 young men who had been best friends since they like realized each other. So I can't really answer that because I love every scene, and when I'm making a play, I think I have to love every scene, because I have to give every scene as much love and effort as the next one. In terms of challenging, I think the play deals with some really challenging topics, but I don't use that word in my head when trying to make something because I don't think it's useful. What was a hard scene to stage was the scene where they all attack Cynthia in the bar, when they all shout at her. I think it's after, I think it's scene 2 in Act 2, where they all shout at her and they demand answers. That was hard because we were a very close-knit company to get to a space where we were going from best friends to attacking is also kind of a physical journey for an actor. But also the rhythm of what Lynn's written in that is really interesting because they're shouting at each other, they're talking very fast, and there's lots of story beats in that you need to hear. And so when you're shouting and attacking, as you do as a human, it's all over the top of each other. Yeah. So there was a lot of sort of theatrical stagecraft that had to go into to make sure that it was realistic that she was being attacked vocally, but that we could hear what we needed to hear. So that took a lot of time, and actually it was only when Lynn came over, because she came to see it in previews, where she gave me a couple of notes, that it started to really build to the place that I needed it to. She was amazing. She's got the best notes in the world. So that was quite a hard scene to stage when you have to turn on a character.
Sorry, that's one of the interesting methods, isn't it? Is that and it's actually marked in the script at certain points that there is crossover dialogue, and multiple characters speaking at the same time. That as you said, that must present certain issues is probably the wrong word, but there are going to be certain difficulties that might attend on that in terms of what the audience might hear and whether they'll hear. How do you handle that, and does that matter for you, or is that part of the kind of natural chaos of the scene?
No, it does matter, because you need to hear stuff so that you can follow the story through. So it's really important. We'd spend a lot of time line running it so we could get it as quick as we could, and then staging it. So I'd be like, this is the line I need to hear, so ping that over the top. But also what's hard about a scene where people are shouting or angry is that if you're shouting or angry, you don't stop to let someone else speak, or you don't stop talking. You keep going. So in a scene where you've got up to 6 or 7 characters on a stage attacking another character, you have to kind of, and we had to get permission from Lynn about like, how far do you I'm going to use the word improv, how far does a character have his scripted line and then still keep that motion going, that anger, that tension going on stage when they don't have another line for 2 pages. Yeah. So that's the, what I mean? So how do you do that? So that was what we had to talk to Lynn about. Does she mind if people are muttering under their breaths or saying stuff, as long as it's in keeping with what she's written? Because I don't believe that if I'm shouting at you, you've upset me, blah, 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 that I'm going to pause and say nothing while someone else speaks. I'd still keep going. Yeah. So that was hard, and to keep that going, but also then get the lines out and the facts that I needed the audience to hear. It took a long time. I don't think we really nailed that until maybe preview 4. So we did maybe 4 or 5 live performances in front of an audience, and then we nailed it. And I went, oh yes, we've nailed it. So it takes a while to get the rhythm of that.
That's really interesting. And when you said you didn't like the word challenging, and I guess I didn't mean that just in the sense of difficult. I meant it as the fact that the play does deal with, as you were just saying, some real kind of knotty themes. and some hard things in terms of, you know, relationships, whether that's, you know, changing relationships between friends, which we see, you know, with both Chris and Jordan, don't we? And then with the three women and that, but equally that kind of, you know, that those challenging racial aspects of the play. And there's a couple of points at which, you know, the language is, you know, particularly challenging for audiences to listen to. I wonder if you've got any thoughts about the use of those kinds of, you know, highly racialized slurs that come out on occasions during the play.
I think that, so Lynn did a lot of research before writing the play. She went to Reading, spent months there. So I think she's written something that has come from a lot of work and has tried to represent what happened and as authentically as possible. And I think, so I agree with you, it's very challenging, and the slurs and some of the language in the play is incredibly challenging. I think as a director, you come into it and you go, this is, how do I say this? It's my job to put this on stage as authentically as possible, and to follow these characters and aid actors to be able to play these parts and understand these characters, and aid the writer's work, and try and do the research to work out why we're telling the story and understand that, so that I can understand why that language is in the play, and so the actors can understand that too and represent the story that Lynn is trying to tell, and do my sort of job as her director, if that makes sense. And I think so she would answer that differently as the writer, why she's included that. I think she'd probably say because she wanted us to really understand and see, not shy away from the language that people were using and what people had to go through, so we could actually experience that and see it. And if she'd taken that out, you would not have experienced it in the way that it went down, because this is stuff that's based on stuff that she found out when she went out there. But I think that's also a question for her as the writer, because she chose to include that language. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
It does.
So I think it's about serving the story would be the answer, and this story being a story where we were representing real people. And I think we took that very, very, very seriously in our room, in that things that made us uncomfortable, things that made us sad. We cried a lot. I cry a lot when I make work because it can be really sad, is actually part of the reality of what happened. And if we shy away from that, then we're not either representing the people that we're representing properly or truthfully, or we're not representing the story properly.
Yeah. And I think going back to some of those other things we've been talking about in terms of the kind of, you know, politics of the play, yeah, in some ways it kind of reflects that kind of degradation of the political language that we've seen, and what, you know, politicians, even, you know, quite mainstream politicians are prepared to come out and say, and the kinds of language they're prepared to use. And it kind of relates to what's a really kind of sad trend in terms of that degradation of political language and personal language, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is really interesting. Thank you. Look, we're getting towards the end of the time that we've got, and so just a couple of questions to perhaps finish this off, Lynette, would be really helpful. One thing that I'd be really interested to know is about the way in which the play was received, in terms of, you know, both critical reception and also just audience reception.
It was incredibly positive. We got quite a lot of 5-star reviews, and we transferred into the West End, and it won Best New Play at the Evening Standard Awards. And it's a play that's continuously referenced. I think from a personal perspective, it was probably the biggest, was the first sort of, it's the biggest thing I'd ever done. And I'm really thankful for the Donmar for trusting me with it, because Lynn is, as I said, she's a powerhouse. She's I think she is getting her flowers now, because she's amazing, but she is has been wonderfully dominating kind of American theatre for such a long time, and as I said, is the first African-American woman to win the Pulitzer Prize twice, and so we need to give her flowers, you know. So to be able to kind of take that and do a good job of it was amazing. So it got really well received. We won a few awards for it, as I said, Best New Play. I think audiences went away and it made them think. And I think that's what the best theatre does, is that it goes, I'm going to think about how I see the world, or I'm going to think about how I see that person, or maybe it's opening up a space where I can understand that a bit more, even if it's just a little bit, even if it means that when you walk out, you're going to have a conversation you may never had before. I think that's the point of storytelling, and that's the point of art, particularly with where the world is right now. And I think it's just important that we're able to talk about things. And I think that this play does that in such a wonderful way, because it doesn't leave, I don't think it's one of those plays that you watch and you go, okay, that's made me feel like this, or it's changed, I'm now very clear politically. It doesn't do that. And that's what's wonderful, I think, is that you'll watch it and everybody will come to their own individual conclusion, or it will linger in your brain for a couple of weeks, or you'll meet somebody that reminds you of one of the characters, or you'll see a news report. It's that, and that's the process of art. Of course, you can watch shows that have a very clear, like, this is the right thing and this is the wrong thing. But I think Sweat does do that, but also leaves you in a space where you can make your own opinions.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, the title is really interesting there, isn't it? Because I guess it partly relates to the kind of, you know, world of physical work that so many of the characters are engaged in, but equally it's that kind of, you know, response to heat and discomfort, isn't it? That kind of feeling of that kind of cold sweat that you get when you know you're uncomfortable about something. And sweat is actually
and it isn't.
I think it's in that first scene, isn't it? It comes up, the idea of one of the characters feeling sweat when it's not to do with work.
Yeah, and it is uncomfortable, and we're having uncomfortable conversations. And I think that the audience were uncomfortable, and I think that's the point. As well as the joy, as well as some of the hope in it as well. There is that too, but I think it's important that they were uncomfortable, and some of the stuff that we were talking about was uncomfortable.
Yeah, and so I guess a good thing to point, you know, anybody who's watching this recording too would be to say, look out those theatre reviews, because, you know, if you can't actually go and see the production, if you read a response to it, that gives you at least some kind of way into thinking about, you know, somebody else's response, and gives you a kind of critical take on it, doesn't it? Which is quite interesting. So look, as a final question, Lynette, a couple of minutes for you to tell us about Clyde's, what you can about it. And, you know, because obviously people can't go to see Sweat at the moment because it's not currently running. They could go to see Clyde's. Why should they do it? What will it give them as a way into thinking about Sweat, and on its own terms?
Yeah, there we are. There's Clyde's. Thank you for including it. Clyde's is it's a comedy, first of all, and Sweat is not. So it's a comedy, and I think Lynn says herself, you can probably YouTube, she's got quite a lot of interviews about this, and that might be really useful when you're thinking about Sweat, is to actually listen to Lynn speak about it. But she speaks about how she wanted to stay in this world, but also in a lighter space, and that's why she thought about writing Clyde. It's set in a sort of rundown pit stop sandwich shop for truckers, and it's run by Clyde, who is that wonderful woman in the middle, right. And she and they are all characters who have come out of prison, and Jason, who is on the left there, that's Paddy Gibson again, who's redoing his role. We meet these characters as Jason joins them, so he's just got out of prison. We're back in 2008, which is where the scenes are in the second bit of Sweat, and it's about how they negotiate what it means to come out of prison, and what that and where they can find hope, and what that means, and how actually a sandwich, something is kind of basic, I'm going to use as a sandwich, can become a massive beacon of hope. And why I think it's really useful if you're exploring Sweat is because Lynn is, in her wonderful way, still exploring those themes that are in Sweat, but you'll laugh, you'll have a bit of fun, and you'll be back in Pennsylvania, Reading, Pennsylvania, with characters who are still trying to work stuff out. And through it, she explores many of the themes that you see in Sweat as well. So yeah, I'm very proud of it. It's on until the 2nd of December. I think it's really important to say that, because it is literally the follow-up, and the character of Jason is in it, so you'll get to see Jason live, and our version of Jason, which I think Paddy does a wonderful job. Yeah, I think that's enough to sell it.
Well, that's brilliant. Lynette, I'd just like to say, a huge thank you for taking the time to speak to us. I know that I found it really, really interesting to be able to talk to you about, what I think is a great play, and I hope that it's one that many students and schools will take up because for so many reasons. And thank you for taking the time. That's been really great to hear from you. So, Pam, over to you for anything that you need to say just to tie things up.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you so much. And as you say, I'm sure students will get a lot out of that and it'll be really useful for them. So really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. It's really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. I just want to say quickly, thank you everyone that's tuned in to listen to it. And I would love you all to look up the Bush and come and just watch some shows. Like, theatre is really cool. And if you're studying English literature, even if you're not studying plays all the time, it's really cool to come and see some of the new writing that's out in the world today. So do come along.
That sounds amazing. And you know what it's like for us as well. There could be students from all over the country studying it. So London's a train ride away. So hopefully more people will get an opportunity to come up and see Clyde's as well. That's amazing. Yeah, thank you. Brilliant.
Yeah, no, please come along. Please come along.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, then.
Thank you.
Thank you very much as well, Andrew. Sorry, I was just going to say thanks, Andrew. That was really great.
Andrew.
Thank you for taking. And I think we can stop the recording now, John, please.